downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
Agape, which is the love of God. Storge, the love of a parent. Phileo, the love of a friend. And then you've got eros, from which we transliterate the English word erotic, which is the romantic love. We all understand these, or at least have seen them. But if you take these four concepts, it finally filters down into two principal ideas in love.
Our high-tech age may have simplified many tasks and given us access to knowledge as never before. From all appearances, we're living in the greatest of all human progress. Still, the shadow of loneliness lingers, haunts, and torments so many people. Hello and welcome to Let My People Think with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Today, Ravi concludes his lesson on the inner ache of loneliness with an explanation of appreciation love, what he calls the missing element in our attempt to deal with the loneliness in our lives. Here's Ravi.
Many years ago, an Air Canada jet had taken off in the United States and was flying, I think, somewhere to Ottawa. And all of a sudden, in midair, there was a fire in the washroom. Remember reading about that. And the pilot knew within a matter of minutes that plane would just turn into a blaze, killing everybody. He started to plummet. And he, I think, landed somewhere in Cincinnati, if my memory serves me right. And as he started to descend at a rapid pace and the plane was coming down while the washroom was still had contained the blaze, he hit that tarmac so hard that the wheels broke and several people were severely injured. The emergency crew came and opened the door, and of course the oxygen sucked in and turned it into an inferno. Several people died, I think something like 17 or 18 of them. The last one to leave the fuselage alive was the pilot himself, and when he left, his uniform was on fire. He could not stay in there anymore. But he walked out of there despondent because of the number of charred bodies around, and he went and spent some time alone without even facing the cameras over the issue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you had a loved one on that plane, and this pilot and this crew had been responsible for rescuing them, wouldn't you want to go and spend a moment with him, clasp his hand and say, "Captain, I want to thank you for what you did for me. I appreciate it, and with a love within my heart, even though I don't know you, I want to say thank you, sir, for saving the life of my loved one." Would you want to do that? Switch the illustration. Shortly thereafter, an Eastern Airlines plane had taken off, I think it was from Atlanta, heading somewhere into the Caribbean. Halfway over the water, they lost power in one engine. I don't recall how many, but probably a 4-engine plane. One by one, each engine began to go, and suddenly all power was lost. And the recording equipment registers the quivering voice of the pilot, in which in nervousness he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have lost all power. Ditching is inevitable." And as that plane started to come fast into the water, as he kept trying and trying, suddenly one engine was revived, and he was able to limp that aircraft a little higher, and a little higher, and limped it back to a safe landing. Whom do you thank then? As G.K. Chesterton said, he said, "My little boy wakes up on Christmas morning and has Santa Claus to thank for putting candy into his stocking. Have I got nobody to thank for putting 2 feet into mine?" Probably the greatest indictment against Western civilization today is that the one day of the year where we dedicated it to Thanksgiving, where the nation was born on a cradle of recognizing that by the merciful hand of God, our food has been provided for us. Now, at least in America, I notice it's being changed from Thanksgiving to Turkey Day. And that may be more reflective of how we have started to perceive ourselves too, if you'll pardon the pun. Incredible that we as Western people in this part of the world, with all the splendor that has been given to us, all the privileges, all the economic benefits, all the loveliness around us, that in these nations we have actually begun to believe we can continue to do it without God. Maybe that's why we are living at the loneliest time of young people in the history of this nation. There is no more unappreciation love. When you've got nobody to thank, there is no worship. When there is no worship, there's a vacuum within the human heart. And that's why I believe it goes beyond love. Yes, there is need love. Yes, there is gift love. Yes, there is need pleasure. Yes, there is appreciation pleasure. But behind all of that, there needs to be that appreciation love that comes to him in worship and says, it is not just that you love me or I love you, but I am surrendering all of my life to you because all of my life was given to me by you. A person who knows that God has provided his or her strength and life is a person who can whip the problem of loneliness. And I'll apply that before we are through. Let me illustrate it even in another way, the way G.K. Chesterton does. I'm indebted to him for this marvelous illustration. Tried it out with my children when they were young. It works. Take my 3 little ones when they were little ones. Say at 7, 4, and 1. When Sarah was 7, Naomi 4, and Nathan 1. Sarah, at age 7, if I were telling Sarah a fairy story, it would go something like this. Little Tommy got up, walked up to the door, opened the door, a dragon jumped in front of Tommy, and Sarah's eyes had gone wide. Little Naomi, who came a week earlier and did not cooperate with my itinerary. I happened to be preaching in Edmonton at that time when my wife phoned me and the secretary said he's busy. She said, tell him he isn't. He needs to come to the phone. She didn't know what was happening. My wife was in the hospital. Naomi was born. And I flew back, and I was sure in my mind that I would do the right thing so that someday I could use it in an illustration. I didn't go to the nursery first. I went to Margie's room. But as I was walking by, I happened to see with the corner of my eye the nursery, and there was a little baby right behind, next to the window. And her hair was at a 45-degree angle. And I felt sorry for that one. I said, well, look at that little one. I said, well, what a cute little Eskimo child, I said. And all of a sudden, I noticed the big Z at the top of the crib there, and I realized this was Zacharias. This was mine. And for months, her hair never rested. It shot up like that at a 45-degree angle. Cheeks so pudgy, it made her eyes look like an afterthought. Now, just imagine telling her the same story. I told Sarah, little Tommy got up, walked up to the door, opened the door, a dragon jumped in front of Tommy, and Sarah's eyes had gone wide. Now, for Nimmy, I'm telling her the same story. I said, Nimmy, little Tommy got up, walked up to the door, and opened the door. Try as she did, it did get a little wide, just staring with intrigue. Then little Nate, at age 1, when his whole worldview was exhausted in one word, cookie. I say to him, Nate, little Tommy got up and walked up to the door. Nathan's eyes go wide. Do you see the difference? Sarah needed the dragon. Naomi needed the open door. For Nathan at age 1, it was a pretty big deal just to walk up to the door. The older you get, the more it takes to fill your heart with wonder. The older you get, the more it takes to fill your heart with wonder. And only God is big enough to fill that heart of ours. That's why Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Or what Pascal said, there is a God-shaped vacuum in every heart that only God can fill. And that fulfillment comes not just in saying, I know you are my Lord and Savior. That fulfillment comes in worship, which is seeped in gratitude. Listen now, need love cries out to God out of its poverty. It comes to God and says, have mercy upon me, a sinner. Gift love comes to God out of service and says, I want to give you my life. Appreciation love comes to God and says, how excellent is your name in all the earth in worship. When you aspire splendidly attractive young maiden, need love says, boy, wouldn't it be lovely if I could have her love and share my life with her. Gift love says, I would love to serve her with my love. Appreciation love says, even if she never belongs to me, she's still a lovely young lady. When you see that in a woman, you call it admiration. When you see that in a man, you call it adulation. When you see that desirability in God, you call it worship. And only those who have moved from need love to gift love to appreciation love have been able to deal with the problem of loneliness. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not learned what it is to worship Him in the aloneness of your life, may I suggest to you, you will never be able to deal with the problem of loneliness. Isn't it intriguing? Please listen. Absolutely intriguing that in the dark dungeon of some destitute home in Beirut, in the Bekaa Valley, where these men are lying in chains and in darkness, where they are given no books to read, men from France, men from the United States like Terry Anderson, and men from England, held in the bondage of these Muslim radicals there who were trying to keep them away from their families. Isn't it intriguing that a man like Terry Waite, or like Terry Anderson, or even the French journalist who said he was an atheist when he went into Lebanon, Terry Anderson comes back a devout man. The French journalist comes back a devout man. There in the darkness of that dungeon, they found out that you can be alone and still have something in your heart greater than the darkness around you. They found out what it was to worship Him in the innermost being. It is not so much aloneness as it is the sense of emotional abandonment. Now, why is it that worship brings this meaning? I'll give you 4 applications, and I think you'll find them meaningful. First of all, that worship takes away loneliness because it binds the fragmented areas of your life. It binds the fragmented areas of your life, fusing all of it with meaning. Have you ever thought of it? When you come to the Lord's Supper, you take a piece of bread and break it, and then you take that juice and drink it. Do you realize in that act of the Lord's Supper, every faculty is being used, even the sense of taste and touch? It binds life together and makes it meaningful. I think of that brilliant illustration of Eric Liddell in the film that portrayed his life, Chariots of Fire, where in the 1924 Olympics he gave up running the 100 meters because the heats were going to be on the Lord's Day. And in his conviction, he didn't want to compromise that. So he changed it to run the 400 meters. And at one point in that film, he has a conversation with his sister, Jenny. Jenny, who was living in Canada for many years, tells the story of how he battled to get to the Olympics and nearly lost all hope when he realized it couldn't be in his event. But here he is talking to Jenny, and at one moment she says, "Eric, why are you giving so much up? Why are you spending so much time training, running, missing this, missing that?" And he gently places his hands on her shoulders and he says, Jenny, God has made me for a purpose for China, but He's also made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure. For Eric Liddell, he was even worshiping his God on the track and field. For him, all of his life was coextensive with worship. Sir, if you're working in a machine shop, that is your expression to God of your reasonable service. You can be there as a Christian serving Him. It pulls the fragmented areas of my life. When I come to preach a sermon, here's the last thing I pray before I leave my room. Every sermon, I say, God, before this goes as a presentation to the people, I give it as an offering to You. It is my worship before God as I preach. If I take my boy out to a ball game on a Friday night and teach him the affections of a dad, I want him to know that that is not a secular aspect of my life. That is also as much a sacred expression of what my life is all about. It binds together the fragmented areas. Secondly, it bestows dignity to every calling. It bestows dignity to every calling. I am truly sorry. And I say this very seriously. You have to take it in the spirit in which I've said it. I am truly sorry for what has happened today in some aspects of the women's movement, where we have lost an admiration for what true womanhood is all about. Somewhere we have caused people to believe that motherhood is no longer as noble as other professions could be. that the one who stays at home is now a second-class citizen. I know it may be a controversial area, but somehow over all the victimization that has taken place over the years, we have gone to the opposite extreme now, where we have actually made people believing in their minds that somebody who's out there in the professional world is doing more than the one who's at home doing something for the family. I'm not arguing for better or worse. I'm at least arguing for dignity in both. Somewhere the glory of womanhood has been lost in our time. It is probably one of the most catastrophic losses that we have become hapless possessors of, and we have made people believe that there is a greater essence and success if you're out there making money for some corporation. So the woman picks up the phone and says, "There it is. I'm at my kitchen table with my cup of coffee. Is this what it's all about for me?" Peter Kreeft, professor of philosophy, Boston College, in his book For Heaven's Sake, talks about the Baconian maxim, man's conquest of nature, and has a powerful paragraph, and he says this. He says the term man, in the phrase man's conquest of nature, is a sexually chauvinistic term. Not because all use of the traditional generic man is, but because we have a civilization that is in the midst of what Carl Stern called the flight from woman. We extol action over contemplation, doing over being, analysis over intuition, problems over mysteries, success over contentment, conquering over nurturing, the quick fix over lifelong commitment, the prostitute over the mother. I think of a John Wesley who was raised in a home of 18 children. And one day he came to his mother and says, "Mom, how do you define sin?" And she says, "Son, whatever weakens your reasoning, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, or takes away your relish for spiritual things. In short, if anything exceeds the authority and the power of the flesh over the spirit, that to you becomes sin, however good it is in itself." What a great privilege to have had a mother like that. I think of my own mom, who is now with the Lord, gave up an enormous opportunity to move to the West alone for 2 years and get herself a foreign returned degree. Anybody living in India will tell you it was the big thing. And she got her scholarship to go to London, specialize in her training for those 2 years. And as she talked and talked, what kept her behind was the fact that she had these 5 children who were her first commitment. And when I buried her in Toronto, deep in my heart, I will always have that passionate gratitude, because she was the one who sacrificed to give us the home. And today, people are made to feel guilty for doing the same thing. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know what the Reformation was all about? It was not the abolition of the priesthood. It was the abolition of the laity. It was the abolition of the laity. We are all a kingdom of priests. I phoned my assistant today, who has labored long and hard while I've gone, and I share this with you in a very meaningful way. I just finished my devotions, and I was reading 1 Samuel 30, and I thought of my staff back home, several of them, who never get to be on the road, never get to be behind a pulpit, whose names people will never know. And as the letters come back from campaign, the letters are thanking me, saying something about a sermon, something about an anointing, something about a gift. And my eyes became moist today as I read the passage in 1 Samuel chapter 30. And the soldiers, 200 of them who'd gone to beat out the Amalekites, came back victorious. And they looked at David and said to him, "Look, we did this on our own. I don't think we're going to share the booty with the rest of them." And David said, "Don't ever say that again. This victory was given to us by the Lord." And he says, "And let me tell you, those who stayed and guarded the supplies are equally meriting of you who were in the front lines." And the Bible says from that day until this, he made that law in the land of Israel. And interestingly enough, I was reading David McCulloch's book later on in the middle of the day. Listen to what he says. During World War II, England needed to increase its production of coal. Winston Churchill called together labor leaders to enlist their support. At the end of his presentation, he asked them to picture in their minds a parade, which he knew would be held in Piccadilly Circus after the war. First, he said, would come the sailors, who had kept the vital sea lanes open. Then would come the soldiers who had come home from Dunkirk, and then had gone on to defeat Rommel in Africa. Then would come the pilots who had driven the Luftwaffe from the sky. Last of all, he said, would come a long line of sweat-stained, soot-streaked men in miners' caps. Someone would cry from the crowd, and where were you during the critical days of our struggle? And from 10,000 throats would come the answer, we were deep in the earth with our faces to the coal. I don't know where God's planted you today, sir, madam, but one of the ways to deal with loneliness is to understand the dignity that he has bestowed to your calling. It binds the fragments, bestows dignity, brings purpose. Just as in Psalm 139, he says, I cannot run from you because you have given me and you have knit me in my innermost being. You see, if you and I know why we are here, we do not have to understand all the whats of our lives. If we know why we are here, created by God for his glory, we do not have to understand all the whats of our lives. But lastly, worship not only binds the fragmented parts of our lives, bestows dignity to every calling, and brings purpose, but it builds gratitude with an appreciation love that is not momentary, but is a posture of life. I give you two illustrations, and with that I'll close. Remember the woman with the alabaster ointment, who walked into this Pharisee's home and broke that ointment and spilled it on Jesus. And the Pharisee looked at him, looked at her, looked at Jesus, knowing she was a woman of ill repute, said if Jesus knew who this woman was, he would never have allowed her to even make contact with him. But Jesus says, I know what you're thinking, Simon. Can I ask you a question? Simon, if you had a debt of 50 and a debt of 500, and you were forgiven for the 50 or a debt of 500, where would you appreciate it more? He said, the debt of 500 is much larger. He says, Simon, you're looking at a woman like that. She came in here. You gave me no water. You did not wash my feet. You gave me nothing to drink. But she has brought her treasured ointment and lavishly poured it upon me, washed my feet with her tears. And he says, Simon, wherever the gospel is preached, there shall this story also be told of what this woman has done to me. You see, she expressed it as her worship, and it came as appreciation love. Nobody was going to stand in her way. You go back to the woman at the well, ethnically rejected, morally rejected, stands alone. And God says to her, when you finally understand what worship is, Jesus says, you shall learn to worship me in spirit and in truth. And she runs back to the village and tells the people the Messiah had come. Let me close with a beautiful story that will touch your heart. Leighton Ford, in his book, tells you of his younger days, in his book Sandy, and he tells his life story. He was given up for adoption as a baby. His mother came from high society and conceived him out of wedlock and did not want the embarrassment. He tells the story in his book, and so they gave him up for adoption. Leighton was telling me some time ago how he tracked down his original parents after his adoptive parents had died. And he said, Ravi, it's the most moving experience I've had in recent memory. I contacted her, I forget where it was, somewhere in Ontario. And he drove. She said, yes, I'd like to see you, son. And he drove for miles and miles. He said it was a blustering, snowy day, a wild storm. And he said, when I arrived at the home, I thought all doors would be locked just as every other house was in the neighborhood. He said, but I arrived at this home and I saw a woman standing out in the front yard, leaning against a tree, waiting, looking in every direction. He says, it was my mom. She couldn't wait to set her eyes upon me. Leighton's a tall gentleman. He said, I got out of the car, went and introduced myself, and we wrapped our arms around each other. He said, we went in and spent a long while. And after I was leaving, I took her by the hand and we were outside. I said, Mom, is there anything I can do for you? He said she paused, the lips began to quiver. She just wrapped her arms around me and wouldn't let me go, and she said, "Son, yes, please love me. Please love me." He came to her with his gift love. She came to him with her need love. And as they had talked and seen how God had used this sad set of circumstances to ultimately lead her son to Jesus Christ and make him one of the finest evangelists in the world today, they joined their hands in prayer with appreciation love for a God who had delivered them from such a dark experience in the past. You see how loneliness can be beaten?
Loneliness can be devastating and debilitating, but when we turn our attention to worshiping our Creator, loneliness can be beaten. If you'd like to order this message in its entirety, visit our online store at rzim.org and look for the Shop tab and then the title of this message, The Inner Ache of Loneliness. If you're listening in Canada, you'll find us at rzim.ca. You can also find contact information on our website if you'd like to get in touch with us by phone or mail. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.